everybody. Nice to be here and nice to have you along. I will say from the start, I am kind of microphone adjacent, so let me know if you can't hear me at any time and I'll speak up. My name is Jennifer Schaefer and I'm a certified child life specialist at Golisano Children's Hospital. I have been working here for just over 22 years now and have been a child life specialist with the hematology oncology population for a majority of that time. I also work with children that come in for stem cell and bone marrow transplants. So a lot of my work is in creating normalcy and helping to educate them about what their treatment plan will look like and working with the family to develop coping skills to get through that time.
And my name is Theresa Shell. I'm also a certified child life specialist here at Golisano Children's Hospital. I've been in the child life field for a little over a dozen years now, and here at the Children's Hospital for the last 2.5. Among my roles here, I support our palliative care services, both pediatric and adult. So I'll tell you a little bit more today about helping to support the children of adult patients with cancer. So we're going to jump right in. And again, please put those questions in the chat. We are looking forward to and holding some time at the end so that we can really have a rich dialogue with the folks on today. So just to give you a quick overview, we're going to talk about kids, how they understand cancer, different ages and stages, what we can do to help support them, and tips for talking to them about cancer, the kind of questions they ask, and a lot of resources at the end to help support you as well. So one thing we do want to make clear as we go over, we're going to be giving you some broad general information. This is kind of like things that we commonly see at different ages, different issues, but please remember that every child, every challenge, and every loss is unique. So it's an overview, but everything needs to be personalized to the unique children.
So we're going to start by talking a little bit about child development. That is our background in education as child life specialists. And that is how we view everything, everyone that we meet, is to have an understanding of how a child typically learns and develops, because that gives us a sense of how they then can cope with things and how we can support them. So we're going to give a brief overview of each developmental stage, how they react to things, and how you can support them in general. So we'll start with that infant toddler stage. Some of the main things to understand is that their thought at this time, they're not going to have an understanding of what cancer means specifically. They don't have the ability for any abstract thinking. They haven't had enough life experience to understand those concepts. All of their learning is really coming through the environment, interacting with it, so that we talk about that sensory motor stage. So through their senses and through interacting physically with the environment. Things that are most important to them is really routine. They need to have their basic needs taken care of. They need to know what to expect, and they do that by having the same routine day in and day out. That gives them a sense of security. They also are really perceptive. Just because they may not understand things at a higher level doesn't mean that they don't sense how others around them are feeling and reacting to things. Some common behaviors that you may see in response to stress: tantrums, changes in eating and sleeping. And these things come about because that change in routine, they don't know how to react. Tantrums tend to come because they don't have the language skills to be able to express to us how they're feeling. So that comes out in a physical manner. And that separation anxiety, their caregivers are their world at that time. And having to suddenly change routines and maybe be with other people can be very stressful. So the main things we want to think about in supporting infants and toddlers is, first, because they are able to perceive the feelings of those around them, being aware of your own emotions. This does not mean that you cannot feel sad, that you cannot be upset, but just being aware of how you are feeling and how that is being expressed, so that you understand if children are picking up on that. Maintaining a child's routine as much as you can. This is one of the big pieces of advice that I give to parents in the hospital when they have a sibling at home that's in this age group. Say one of the best things you can do since you are at the hospital and not with your child is make sure anyone else in the family is able to keep their routine. And this goes, for sleeping routines, eating routines. If that child is in daycare or preschool, it's okay to have them go and be a part of that. That's something that's actually really helpful to them. Meeting those immediate physical needs, so they know that they are safe and cared for. Using language that is simple, smaller words, concrete language, not words that are going to be misinterpreted. Then having that understanding about the child's behavior. So I mentioned they don't have the language skills to be able to express how they're feeling and they may be acting out. Remembering that that may be where that's coming from, and that behavior needs to be understood, and have some patience in dealing with that. And then the biggest thing we can do is allow them that time to play. That is how children express themselves and work through their emotions. So having one-on-one time set aside for them, joining them in what they're choosing to do, but making sure there is time for them to explore the world and play. The preschool age, we're getting a little more independent. A lot of people call it the egocentric stage. Some kids have a better understanding about what it means to be sick. So they may have had a cold or someone in the family has had a cold. So they have a sense of illness on some level. But again, not a sense of what it may mean to have a serious illness. Their thinking is very magical. They may see things happening, but they don't have a sense of understanding of how those things are happening or why. Some common behaviors that you'll see in this age group is regression. So if you have a child that's been toilet trained, sometimes you may see some regression in that behavior. You may see bursts of emotion. They may be playing calmly at one point and then start crying or become upset. This is the normal age of asking why. So you may see those repeated questions, even though they've asked and you've answered where somebody is or why something is. Having the patience to deal with those questions over and over, it takes some time for them to process that language. Again, that separation anxiety. They're used to their routines. They're used to being around their primary caregivers. And, even at the higher end of this age group are just maybe venturing into being out of the home on a daily basis. So being away can cause a lot of stress. And then this is a great age for dramatic play. So any kind of play that helps to act out what they're experiencing. Here in the hospital, we do something called medical play, which is really like dramatic play, but based in a medical environment. So kids playing with dolls and with toy doctor kits, with real medical equipment. Recently, I had a mother come to me and she said, I know what's going on. My daughter is so traumatized. And I said, no, tell me. And she showed me a video on her phone of her 4-year-old daughter doing medical play in our playroom. And she had a doll and she was doing things to it that she experiences in her own care. And the mother was very, very upset by this. And so I gave her some time to think about it. And then I explained to her what medical play was. And I said, I agree. I do think your daughter's been traumatized by a lot of what's going on. I also think this type of play is very healthy for her and productive. And what she's doing is actually helping to process through play what she sees and what she experiences because she doesn't know how to talk about it with us. So this is something you may see again, but don't be afraid of it. And it's okay to encourage it. Supporting this age group, providing a lot of reassurance. Again, that routine, because that's how children learn what to expect if they know what to rely on. Healthy emotional expression. There are lots and lots of books out there for this age group about feelings, with feelings faces. This is a great time to pull out those books and just sit and read about feelings, share things that make us feel those different ways. And then again, like I just mentioned, encouraging that type of dramatic play that they can express themselves through. Watch for any signs of misunderstanding. Again, children at this age are very concrete, so they're not going to understand things on the level that we do. And that magical thinking can come in. Sometimes they feel like they are to blame for somebody being ill. We want to make sure that they understand it is not their fault, but it's a difficult concept to think beyond themselves. The school age group, we're getting to that time where they're starting to really form their own identity and think of themselves outside the home and with a peer group. So they can now understand a little more about the difference between the simple cold and having a serious illness or condition. We do want to make sure that if there's any misinformation that they've been given, that we help to clarify that. And remember, they're out in a peer group now. They may be in a school environment. Kids talk about things, and they may be hearing information that is just not true. So if you are in a situation with your family, it may be important to talk about these things and make sure that they're hearing correct information. They're starting to think more logically, and one of the big things is having rule-based life. So they're used to structure from school. They're used to having to follow instructions and follow rules. So some of the common behaviors you'll see when they're dealing with stress is, again, some regression. Some kids like to be treated a little younger at this age when they're dealing with stress, that worry or fear about what's going to happen. How will my life change? How will things be different? Separation, again, some repeated questions. Playing or acting out any themes related to illness. Becoming angry when their life gets disrupted or they're worried. And then starting to distance themselves from family or friends. So ways to support children at this age. Again, play is always something good to encourage at any age, and that emotional expression. So talking to kids about feelings, being able to identify feelings, what those words mean, what kinds of situations make us feel that way. Encouraging those peer relationships. Let's remember, if they're starting to form their own identity, they're starting to do that away from the adults and with other children, and that social circle is becoming important. But maintaining the household rules, because rules start to become very important at this stage, and children often feel let down when things aren't fair or don't go a certain way. It's okay to still have rules in the home. Families in the hospital run into this situation a lot. They struggle with disciplining their child because they say, I feel so badly, he has cancer. But they also realize very quickly that not having the typical discipline that they do at home is not helping the child. And so this is one of the things we stress is maintain your general family rules. Setting aside time to talk, it could be hard and you never want to kind of just do this on the fly. So set aside a time with your child to sit down and just check in and, how are you doing? What happened today? Or are there any questions since the last time we talked? And making sure that conversation is always honest and direct. Children at this age, like I said, they're starting to kind of think beyond themselves. And so experiencing illness or loss in their own lives, starting to think about how does that affect me and could that happen to me? So they may start to worry about their own health. Could that happen to me? Getting a little older into that tween age, as we call it. Children, a lot of times they have a better understanding of what cancer means. They have some more life experience or have heard about it amongst friends or family. They may not fully understand what it is, but often they have an experience or an understanding that is more negative. Very important, again, to ask, what do you know about cancer, and help clear up any misconceptions that they may have. They also have better reasoning skills and can help to problem solve. So these are things that you can think about when you're having discussions, is to pull in those skills of how to include them in talking through things and coming up with solutions to some situations your family is dealing with at a child level, repeat, not adult problems. Some of the common behaviors and feelings that children have: hiding their feelings, not knowing how to share them or verbally express them to those around them. They get embarrassed or nervous about how they're feeling. They may not want to share. And a lot of times that fear or worry comes out as anger. So, turning against those who are closest to you is a common response that you may see. Supporting children at this age, really kind of talking through with a little more detail about what is going on, using some analogies that they can understand, that they may be familiar with in their life. They can understand kind of a cause and effect of things. So being very clear about what has caused an illness or situation and what is not. Discussing plans. How are things going to change on a day-to-day basis? Who's going to be caring for you? Who will be driving you to school or picking you up from soccer practice? And then talking about the future when it's time. But discussing too how things may change in the long term and how your family is going to plan for that. Again, you really want to maintain these peer relationships. They're so important in helping them to develop and helping them to form an identity and learn how to express themselves. And having that connection with school, reaching out to school to make sure that the counselor knows what's going on in the family and can be somebody on the other side as an ally to help understand. And then our final age group is the teenager. In these years, they're going to have a much better understanding of how the body functions. And so any explanations that you use can be in more detail. You can talk about that cause and effect, how the body may change. Again, misinformation is always a good thing to talk about. You always want to ask, what is your experience with this word or this situation? What do you know about it? And how can I help clear up anything that may not be completely true? They also are thinking more long-term about life. And so themes of illness or loss are going to have more of an understanding in this age group. And they're going to be able to think ahead to how is this going to change our lives? What does this mean for me? And what does this mean for my life? Some common behaviors that they have is that ongoing struggle of, I'm trying to be independent and find my identity away from the family, but I also feel like I'm very needed. And how do I balance those two things? Having fears about adult issues. I know our social worker here talks about this all the time. She's so cognizant of the conversations that she has with families about financial stressors, making sure that she doesn't have them in front of our adolescent patients because she doesn't want them to ever know anything about the family's stressors that they may not share with their child or feel any sense of responsibility. But these are common things that adolescents will think about when they know that their family is struggling. Again, maybe hiding feelings, not wanting to share them with a family because they feel like they're causing more of a burden. And so it's important to build that bridge again and let them know that it's more important to understand how they're feeling and to address it. Supporting teens. Again, always checking your own emotions. How am I feeling and how am I expressing them? And how am I helping my child to learn healthy ways to express his or her feelings? Understanding that need for that independence and that privacy. I always try to tell staff here, we want to reach out, we want to be able to help children and fix things and make them feel better. But sometimes we need to just respect the fact that they want some time alone, and that's okay. And let them know when you're ready, I'm here to talk. Get some input in problem solving, but make sure it's not about any adult issues. That it might be some simple things like, I may not be able to cook dinner this week. What are some things we could do, or things that you like that we can make ahead of time? Or, is there somebody that we can figure out can get you a ride back from soccer practice? We won't be able to do it this day. Who would you like us to reach out to? But again, also that caution of not treating them like adults because they aren't yet adults. They're battling with that themselves. And then discussing the future implications of illness and death. Again, teenagers have more of an ability to see to the future, but yet not complete responsibility toward it. So they may struggle with being like coming to you and being able to ask about these things. So it's always a good idea to kind of put out there too. You know, if you're ever thinking about
Dive in a little now that we have a wonderful foundation, Jennifer, about the different developmental stages and how things to think about. Some things to think about when you are getting ready to talk with your kids about cancer. First off, acknowledge for yourself and acknowledge for your family. This is a difficult topic. No matter what's going on in your family's journey around this, it is a difficult topic. And there are a lot of emotions that'll come up for you as adults. And there's a lot of emotions that'll come up for your kids at all ages and stages. So taking time to kind of process your own emotions and prepare yourself for these conversations and thinking about what information do I want to share? What are the words I want to use to share it, and kind of mapping it out a little bit in your head. I can tell you when you sit down to have these conversations, they're not going to go the way you have it perfectly mapped in your head, but kind of having some basic idea of like, this is what I want to share. This is words I want to use can be really helpful. And then choose your timing really carefully. Right as your kid is getting ready to go to bed is not usually a great time because they're tired. Right before dinner when they're really hungry, not usually a great time. So pick a time when your kid is well rested, when they are well fed, and they're kind of in a headspace to be able to talk, not while they're on the way to soccer practice or on their way home from a birthday party. So once you're ready and you've got a good time and you've got a good space, kind of sit down with your kid and start off with a bit of a warning shot, right? Chances are that they've already picked up some of what's going on. For the younger kids, they tend to pick up on the emotions and sort of the changes in routine and the way people around them are behaving. For older kids, they tend to pick up a lot when people think they aren't listening. I can promise you that if you're having conversation anywhere in the house, even if they're on a different floor or a different room, or they're really excited about that video game they're playing, they are listening. I can't tell you how many times I've been consulted to go help with a family. And, you know, one story that really stands out for me is, you know, they'd asked me to come down and talk with an 8-year-old. And they had said, like, you know, like, can you come down, see this family, help them understand what's going on, help the kids. So I come down and I go to meet the family, and the grandmother is standing there with her hands on the shoulders of the 8-year-old and says to me, so they're standing in the waiting room, family waiting room of the ICU where the mom is a patient. Grandma's got hands on the kid's shoulder, looks me in the eye and says, he doesn't know anything yet. We haven't told him anything. And in my heart, I thought, well, I'm guessing he knows quite a lot. But this idea that because I haven't talked to them, they haven't picked anything up yet is a common misconception. So I looked at the 8-year-old and I started with that sort of that opener question, like, all right, before I launch into what's going on, can you tell me what you know? Like, what do you think's going on? And the 8-year-old looked at me, goes, mom's dying of cancer. Nobody wants to tell me. So they brought you down to tell me? I looked at my kid and I said, yeah, that's about right. Let's talk through your questions. But being able to start with what they know and acknowledge that these are uncomfortable conversations. And so for this kid, you know, the way he presented it tells me, like, I just want to talk about it straight up. Don't dance around the bush. I was like, great, I will meet you there and we'll talk about it directly. For others, a more gentle approach works better. Families are the experts in their children. So really trust your instincts. You know your kids and how they process information. Gentle and honest language is really helpful. A lot of times there's a natural hesitancy to talk to kids about difficult things, about serious illness, especially if someone may not get better, if they may die. Those can be very difficult conversations to talk about those illnesses and potential for death. But being honest is almost always the best choice. Because when we don't provide honest information to kids, two things happen. One, their imagination will fill in the gaps, and the bits and pieces that they heard, plus the information gluing those pieces together, they can come up with stories in their heads that are actually worse than reality. No matter how tough reality is, what they're imagining may be worse. So that honesty is really important to help prevent those misconceptions. The other thing that happens is when we hide information from kids and we don't tell them at least like a gentle, age-appropriate version of what's going on, then we can lose trust, right? So you're hiding things, and then eventually you have to tell them what's going on, and they're like, well, how long have you known this, and what haven't you told me, and what aren't you telling me now? So that honesty is very important, even if it feels difficult in the moment. So the other thing about these conversations is you may have like this list of things like, okay, I want to explain the cancer, I want to explain the treatment, I want to explain this. And they may, like, they're there with you for the conversation for like the first two things you want to cover, and then they're checking out like, nope, I'm done, I'm out, I'm full. And you're going, wait, I still had 6 more things I want to talk to you about. Be prepared to stop. Think of it like, think of your kids like a teacup, right? And you're pouring tea into the cup, and at some point the cup is full. You can keep pouring, but nothing else is going into that cup until kids have had a time to process the information, which they do through play. As Jen had mentioned, from toddlers to teens and everyone in between, play is such an important part of how kids process information and cope with stressful circumstances. So we have to pause, give them time to play. And when they're ready, they will come back and they're ready for more information. Leave the door open, leave the invitation there. We can talk more whenever you want. You can ask as many questions as you want. But if they're like, what is cancer? What does cancer have? What's for dinner? That's a sign their teacup is full. Give them a little time to play. And then the other thing I want to say is be open about sharing your feelings. A lot of times our instinct is not to let the kids see us cry. You know, oh, I try to be strong. I try to make sure the kids never see me cry, never see me mad, never see me frustrated or confused or anxious. But all of these emotions are things that kids feel too. And if all the adults in their lives are nothing but smiles all the time, it can leave kids feeling like, are we all supposed to be happy? Is there something wrong with me that I'm sad? Is there something wrong with me that I'm angry or confused or frustrated? These emotions are normal, natural, healthy parts of coping in life. And adults, we feel it too. And it is okay for kids to know that you feel these things too. So when they say, I'm scared, you can say, I'm a little scared too. What can we do to help comfort each other? Right? So a good rule of thumb, if you're having a sad moment, it's okay if they're seeing you cry. If you are like really having a cathartic big cry and it's turned to like the child comforting you instead of you comforting the child, maybe that's a good time to step back, tag in another person in your life to help support that moment, and then circle back when you're feeling a little calmer. There will be moments of silence in these conversations. It's okay. Live in that silence. It's a good thing. You don't have to be talking the whole time or they're talking the whole time. So kids are going to ask questions. This is fantastic. They do a wonderful job of self-dosing how much information they can handle at any given time. Typically, if you answer the question that they've asked, just that question, and invite them to ask more questions, and then just keep asking the questions answering the questions they ask, and giving them breaks when they're ready. But they'll tell you, generally speaking, for the most part, if they're old enough to ask the question, they're old enough to hear the answer. Again, using that gentle and honest language. So common questions that you're going to get from kids is, what is cancer, right? So important things to know about cancer. It is a kind of illness, it's a sickness, but it's not like other things. It's not like when you have a cold or a stomach bug, right? So for older kids, you can kind of like use analogies like Jen was mentioning, like cancers, our body is made up of cells, like Legos, right? You have all these pieces of Legos, you can put them together to build something like a car, right? Our body is made up of little pieces called cells that make up all the different parts of our body. Cancer happens when some of the cells aren't growing right or are growing too fast or are sick and not working right. And then it makes it so that that part of our body where the cancer is doesn't work right. With younger kids, it's really nice to have the Legos up. This is one of those great times to tap into your child life specialist if you have one available, because we use play to help teach. So you often find this with our, Lego kits and other things to help teach kids about their cancer. Common questions. Is cancer contagious? It is not. You didn't catch cancer from anybody. You can't give it to anybody. Nobody made dad sick because they didn't wash their hands, right? Whose fault is it? This is a big one, especially for those kids with the rules and the discipline, like, okay, but why is it happening and whose fault is it, right? Cancer is nobody's fault. Nobody caused it to happen. And it's okay to say the doctors and the nurses, they don't know why cancer happens. It's not that common, right? Cancer doesn't happen a lot, but sometimes when it does, we don't know why. It kind of depends on the cancer and what's going on. But it's not your fault, especially for those younger kids with that magical thinking. They can get in their head that the idea that something they did caused the cancer to happen or the illness to happen. It's actually one of the most common misconceptions for preschoolers and early school age kids to think, oh, I was mad at her and I thought mean things and now she has cancer, so it's my fault. Or I didn't want to share mom and dad with a brother and now he has cancer, so it's my fault, right? So getting ahead of that and letting them know it's nobody's fault. Nothing you said or did or thought or prayed or wished caused it to happen. That's not how cancer works. If the person in your family with cancer is going to have chemotherapy, radiation, or surgery, the kids may ask about that too. Some gentle, age-appropriate language for most kids. Chemotherapy is a special kind of medicine used to fight cancer cells. Radiation, I say radiation is a special kind of light, like a medicine light that's used to help fight radiation. How do you describe it, Jen?
Radiation, probably the same way, right? A beam of light that doesn't touch you and doesn't hurt.
And then surgery, I usually describe the doctors make a small opening to take the cancer out, or as much of the cancer as they can out. I like small opening more than cut, since kids tend to have negative associations with those words, cut or open up. If there's loss of hair, there may be questions about that. Why are you losing your hair? Why am I losing my hair? Why is my sister losing her hair? So the chemo medicine goes after cells that grow really, really fast, like cancer cells. There are some other parts of our body that grow really, really fast. Our hair is one of those. So is the lining of our mouth and our esophagus and our stomach. So sometimes the chemo medicine goes after those fast growing cells too. So hair might fall out, might get a stomach ache, or mouth might hurt. This is always the tough one. Do people with cancer die? Are you going to die? Am I going to die? These are very normal, healthy questions for kids to ask. For the grown-ups in their lives, it can be that moment that just makes you go, I don't know how to answer that. I don't want to answer that. I don't want to think about it. But again, if they're old enough to ask, they're old enough to hear the answer. So the answer really depends on the cancer. There are some cancers that are very treatable, and most people with those cancers get better. If that's the cancer that's in this child's life, whether it's their cancer or someone else's cancer, fantastic, tell them that. Some cancers are not as easy to get rid of. So if they ask and you don't know, it's okay to say, I don't know. The doctors and the nurses are doing everything they can to make the cancer better, to make it go away. We don't know how it's going to turn out yet. But I promise when I know, you'll know. And you can ask as many questions as you want, and I promise to tell you the truth. The other one, especially for the school age kids, preschoolers tended to say everything to everyone everywhere. But as kids get older, they start to get more cognizant of social scripts and sort of that idea of like, is this a secret? Is this private? Am I allowed to talk to other people about it? Please, for your child's sake and your school's sake, update the school. If you've got kids in daycare, in preschool, elementary school, junior high, high school, if something like this is going on, give the teacher or the school counselor a heads up. They can provide additional support at school, but it's also really important that they know at least in broad strokes what's going on, so that if your child's having a tough time at school and having trouble coping, that may come out as changes in behavior. If the school doesn't know what's going on and they don't understand the context, they might respond with discipline, right? Like, oh, this kid is usually so well behaved and now they're picking fights in the school cafeteria. We got to nip this in the bud. Not helpful at that point. But the school needs to know, so at least in broad strokes, so that they can respond appropriately and be supportive. So your kids may have questions like, is it okay to talk about it at school? Is it okay to tell my friends? Is it okay to tell my teachers? So kind of be open with them about like, okay, I wanted to let you know, I talked with your teacher. I let them know, grandma's in the hospital, that she has cancer. And then we're waiting to see what's going to happen. And that if you're having a tough time at school, I want you to be able to go down and talk to the school counselor, and your teacher knows that, and we'll give you a hall pass if you need one. Just kind of set the expectation. There may be some details that you share with your child that are more private, that you don't want all the details out there to the world. Just be honest with your kids, like, okay, this is, I'm going to share this with you. This is private, so we're going to talk about it. The family, please bring your questions to me. But this part is private right now, so let's not talk to everybody about it. You probably already have systems and rules in place about talking about what's private and what's not in your family. The same thing follows right along, just letting the kids know what's expected. A few specific things in talking with kids when it's their parents who have cancer. So parents or primary caregivers, recognizing that families come in all sorts of varieties. So who's in that parental or primary caregiver role may be a parent, maybe a grandparent, aunt, uncle, cousin, sibling, neighbor, friend. But regardless, when that primary caretaker is the one with cancer, there are some things that are really important to cover with kids. One, you'll never be alone, right? We don't know what's going on with your mom right now. We're not sure how this is going to turn out, but there will always be someone here with you, and there will always be someone to take care of you. You will never be left alone. Ask questions, and I promise to answer honestly. That invitation to ask questions especially is important for little kids who may need a little coaching or support how to get their thoughts out and express their thoughts and worries and emotions. And for older kids, again, making sure that they're not stuck in a social script that tells them like, oh, dad's sick and mom's worried about him, and I don't want to make it worse by asking questions, or I don't want to make it worse by telling them I'm sad or scared or angry or frustrated. So, leaving that door open and saying like, it's absolutely okay to feel all your feelings and ask all your questions. And hold some space for yourself. If you are the primary caregiver for the parent with cancer, there's the whole role of supporting your kids, but there's also holding space for yourself and processing all of your own emotions around it. And like we talked about before, it is okay for your kids to see your emotions. It's comforting to know, oh, mommy's sad too. I'm not in this alone. Whenever possible, please give children choices. And this is as true for, 3-year-olds as 18-year-olds. Having a say and having some control in how they engage with their parent or caregiver who has cancer. It's very normal for kids to feel anxious about visiting at the hospital or feeling anxious about seeing them, in treatment and that's okay. Like talk about the, like if we go visit at the hospital, these are the kind of things you're going to see. Mom will look a little different because of this. This is how she'll look. You may see, a tube with some oxygen, some extra air for her to breathe. Let them know this is what you'll see. And do you want to go? And if a child says like, yeah, I really want to go to the hospital and see mom, great. Off you go. They're like, I really don't want to do this. Don't make them. When we survey adults who had parents with cancer when they were young, that's really one of the themes that come up is that lack of choice. I really wanted to go see my dad and I wasn't allowed, and it traumatized me for life. Or I really didn't want to see him like that, but they forced me to go in his room and I'm traumatized for life. So it's really, it's more that lack of choice and being forced to do something that they're not comfortable with that can really cause that emotional burden, more so than the actual, hospital visit or things like that. So there are some times when your child's coping needs are really beyond what you can do yourself at home. And there are times when you need to seek outside support for your kids. So some big red flags to watch for that says like, my child is not coping well, whether it's with their own cancer, siblings' cancer, or an adult loved one's cancer. Extreme changes in behavior, right? Like tantrums. If your 2-year-old's throwing tantrums, that's probably normal because they're 2. But if they used to throw like 1 tantrum a day and now they're throwing 10 tantrums a day that last much, much longer than usual and are really feeling emotionally out of control, that's a big change in behavior. If they were a straight A student and now they're failing all their classes, that's a big change in behavior. If they're really isolating and pulling back, if they used to hang out with friends all the time and now all they want to do is sit in their room alone, they don't want to come, eat meals together as a family, they just want to take their food and go back to their room, like that kind of isolation, that's a big red flag. They don't want to do any of their sports activities. They don't want to play with any of their toys. They just want to like sit and stare at the wall. That's a big red flag. And of course, any comments about harming themselves or others absolutely take seriously the very first time you hear. And then I will tag it back to you to tell. So there's some great resources. Can I tag it back to you, Angela, to tell us a little bit about these?
Yeah, so a lot of the content that's in this presentation, there's actually a booklet associated with it. If this were in person, I'd hand them out. So if anybody is interested in getting a copy of that, I can make sure I get that to you, so you can reach out to me after the presentation. And I can also send the slides so that we can have a link to the video and also the PDF of this. So, and go ahead.
There's also a lot of great resources online available as well. There's this link at the bottom here is the one to our hospital's website. The Helping Children Cope tab has a lot of resources for talking with kids about death and dying, but there's also a resource in there, a page about talking about kids with cancer. So I just wanted to point that out to you as well. And then these are some of the great resources from CSC, and those will be available.
Yep. So these are also from like a national organization that we are affiliated with. But I know I sent you a link to, we also have a summer camp this summer that's in the end of August for any kids impacted by cancer. So whether they themselves or a sibling or a parent, that's a free summer camp. So I sent that flyer to those of you that have signed up. We are also looking to locally here in Rochester start youth support groups here at Cancer Support Community Rochester. So I'm actively recruiting potential facilitators who are licensed mental health professionals. So feel free, if you know anybody, to send them my way. So.
I'm going to stop sharing screen so we can see each other better. There we go. And we would love to open it up to questions, comments, and thoughts from the group.
And if anybody doesn't feel comfortable asking them out loud, feel free to type them in the chat and we can read those. So. I'll ask a question. So if you have children kind of in different age brackets in that group, do you suggest having conversations with each child individually just based on their ages?
Yes, Angela, I would, especially if it's a pretty significant gap in ages, because you really do want to think about whether, sharing information needs to be more sensory or physical or concrete information versus being able to provide a little more abstract ideas. And also the kind of resources. And there are a lot of books out there that talk about children having cancer, that talk about adults having cancer. Even within those, there are times I read through and find information I like, find information I don't like. So that's different ways you can cater to those different age groups, some of those resources. Sometimes I even suggest to a family that, I like certain parts of this book. There are certain things I would leave out. You can skip, or you can use it as a way to learn yourself, maybe some of the language that you would like to have in your own conversation.
Hi, I have a question. My name's Kathy, and my son is 19, and he's had to have a few surgeries already to remove lymph nodes, and they go in the same area, and they go through the same incision. So now, and they've all come back negative, all the biopsies, but now he has to see an oncologist, a lymphoma specialist. Is there any certain questions that we should be asking? I mean, I know he is just outside of the age group, but he's still kind of, naive. I told him, I says, it's not cancer, but you do have to see an oncologist.
Right. I would think that would be an important distinction to make from the beginning, is what an oncologist is and what parts of the body and what concerns with the body they address, to understand, because that can be a very scary thing to suddenly say, I'm going to refer you to an oncologist. So definitely being very clear about that. Maybe doing a little homework about what the role of an oncologist is. And I think jotting down some questions. I often tell our adolescent population, we recognize you're not an adult, but we recognize that you're nearing that stage and that you're wanting to be independent, but it's our responsibility to show you how to do that, to teach you. And we also realize that being in front of, a lot of people standing around your bed, or even one in an office, can be very difficult, and questions may not come at the time that you're in front of somebody. And so if you have those questions outside of that moment, write them down then, and then we can help to address them. So, I would suggest doing a little homework before, coming up with a list of thoughts and questions they may have, so that you can kind of bring those to your appointment together.
All right, thank you.
So, hi, thanks for the talk. I was curious, I know that about a year ago now, we had grand rounds where someone said he doesn't like any of the books that we have in terms of working with children and exploring serious illness. And, other than our tried and true Invisible String here, I was curious if you have other favorites that you like to recommend.
I do. I have a couple. So for toddlers and preschoolers, one of my favorite books about talking with young kids about emotions and death and dying is called The Goodbye Book by Todd Parr. I can. Oh, it doesn't work with backgrounds. Hold on. Technical difficulties. There we go. I can see my office behind me. Okay. So The Goodbye Book by Todd Parr is one of my favorites. You can see the artwork is pretty like little kid. And it kind of talks about the different emotions that people, or in this case, fish, might feel when a loved one is gone. And it kind of helps give those words and phrases for talking about emotions. One of my other favorite books, and I remember the grand rounds you're talking about, because I emailed the speaker afterwards. I was like, do you know about Lifetimes? Because this is my hands down favorite book about talking with kids about death and dying. It's called Lifetimes, A Beautiful Way to Explain Death to Children, by Brian Melanie and Robert Ingpen. And it's got lovely artwork and simple kid-friendly language. And it goes through the basics of understanding the concepts of death and dying, which is as adults, we tend to understand as like one big thing, like, do you know what dead means? Yep, I know what dead means. Kids, they get it in bits and pieces. The physicality of death, the permanency of death, the universality of death. So this one kind of covers it all, but it does it like a kid's book, right? This is how it is for birds. This is how it is for fish. Finally, you get to the back of the book. This is how it is for people. And it includes a lot of those nice reassurances that kids need to hear. Most of the time when we're sick or we're injured, we get better. But it covers the very basics. If our bodies can't get better, the body stops working and it dies. But I like that it does it in a way that's very kid-friendly, very repetitive. It also has no spiritual religious content, making it a more universally usable tool. So those are my two favorites for reading books. There's also some great interactive journals to help kids process thoughts and emotions. This is one of my favorites for that. It's called When Someone Has a Very Serious Illness by Heegard. And it's an interactive journal. The pages have different prompts, and kids are invited to write and draw on it about all the things they're thinking and feeling. So that's one of my other go-to resources.
I say those are my top 3 books as well. There's also a journal similar to what Theresa just showed you that they make for younger kids called, I think it's My Stupid Illness. So that the title is very fitting for that older school age, kind of middle school child. But again, it's a workbook of sorts to be able to kind of talk through and jot down things as you go. Also in that link that Theresa showed you to the URMC website, there is a list of books on there as well that I've sent to a lot of people before. So some good references there.
There's a ton of resources on that website that our bereavement coordinator and parent advocate Liz Conrose put together. So definitely check that out for lots of great stuff. Any other questions? And thank you to Marianne who put a link in the chat to Something Very Sad Happened, a Toddler's Guide to Understanding. Ooh, I don't know this one. I'll have to check it out. Thank you.
It doesn't have a great story. It has a story about a grandmother dying, and then it has all the pronouns and her name written in red, so you can substitute any name or pronoun. But what it has that I love is it has 4 pages for how to talk to toddlers about death. And it's a great resource for parents. The story is sort of so. I love the Todd Parr book too, but it's very good for parents.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Well, and while we have Theresa and Jen here, does anybody have any scenarios that they've come across or that they've faced that they didn't know how to handle it, or you can say how you handled it and see if they have any other suggestions.
If not, Angela, I just have a final thought. One of the things that comes up a lot in my work is whether to actually use the word cancer with children. We've used it very freely today, but it's actually something that families give a lot of thought to and sometimes have a lot of concern about. And I've seen everything from, adamantly stating, I will not use the word cancer, to I want my daughter to use that word because right now she's calling her tumor the bad thing, and I don't want her to feel like there's anything bad about her body. And then I've had things right in the middle. In all of those situations, really having some good communication and assessment of what has been talked about has been the most helpful. I've sat at a table with a family and a medical team where a parent said, no, I'm not going to tell him he has cancer. And there was a lot of discussion. And, I finally said to the mother, well, what have you told him? And she said, I've told him you have lymphoma. I've told him this is what that means. And she basically had really well informed him. She just didn't want to use the word cancer. So she had actually done a really amazing job with her son. I've had a lot of parents say that they have another family experience with cancer that ended with death. And so they're afraid to use that word with their child, but are okay saying is leukemia. And I'm fine with you describing what it means to have leukemia. And then again, like I just mentioned, another parent that said, no, I don't want her to keep saying, I have a bad thing. I have a bad thing. And she knew her child well, and she sat right there and supported us using the word cancer. And she said, so you understand that mass in you, that's cancer. That's what it's called. And her daughter now uses the word freely and tells people she has cancer and is actually quite accepting of it at a young age. But it is something that you really have to think about within your family's culture, what you're comfortable with, what works for you and your child, not being afraid of it, but also just being very aware of what your own feelings are, and how else you can still inform your child well of what cancer is.
Any other last minute questions? All right, well, I just want to thank Jen and Theresa for joining us today, and thank you all for attending. And if you have any questions, you have my email, so you can follow up with me, or again, I know some of you know Jen and Theresa, so you can follow up with them as well. So
Thank you very much. Thank you, Angela.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye, Angela. Talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.